You've probably heard it 1,000 times. If you have diabetes, bread, rice and pasta are basically off limits. And honestly, that advice sounds simple until you look at real life. These foods are part of family dinners, cultural traditions, and comfort meals. Telling someone to cut them out forever is like telling them to stop celebrating birthdays. It's just not realistic. And here's what surprised me when I started digging into the science and real-world data. It's not bread itself that's the problem. It's how refined it is, what it's paired with, and how fast it hits your bloodstream. That's where things go wrong. And once you understand that, these foods stop being scary and start being manageable. Let's start with bread, because this is where most people get confused. White bread looks innocent, but it's basically flour that's been stripped of fiber and turned into something your body digests almost instantly. That's why your blood sugar shoots up so fast. There's almost nothing there to slow it down. Brown bread sounds healthier, but here's the catch. A lot of brown bread is just white bread with color added. Molasses, caramel coloring, sometimes even extra sugar. So your brain thinks it's healthy, but your blood sugar says otherwise. This is why labels matter more than names. What you're really looking for is fiber. Fiber acts like speed bumps for glucose. The more fiber in the bread, the slower the rise in blood sugar. That's why whole grain and true whole wheat breads can be better options, if they're made right. When the grain is intact, digestion takes longer. And that slower digestion means a gentler glucose curve instead of a sharp spike. Now here's a trick that sounds almost too simple, but it actually works. Freezing bread and then toasting it changes the structure of the starch. Some of it turns into what's called resistant starch, which your body treats more like fiber. Studies have shown that this can noticeably reduce the blood sugar spike after eating bread. Not eliminate it, but soften it. And that's the theme here. We're not chasing perfection. We're chasing control. This is one of those small habits that doesn't feel dramatic, but over time, it really adds up. Sourdough is another one people talk about a lot, and for good reason. The fermentation process creates organic acids that slow how quickly carbs turn into glucose. But sourdough isn't automatically magical. If it's still made from refined flour and low in fiber, it can spike blood sugar almost like white bread. What makes sourdough helpful is when it's combined with whole grains and minimal sugar. That's when the fermentation actually matters. Then there are rye and pumpernickel breads, which tend to be higher in fiber and have a denser structure. They digest slower, and many people notice their glucose rises more gradually after eating them. They taste different, and not everyone loves that deep, earthy flavor. But metabolically, they're often friendlier than fluffy white bread. One of the most interesting breads out there is sprouted grain bread, like Ezekiel-style bread. Sprouting changes how starch and protein behave in the grain. You get more fiber, more micronutrients, and fewer fast carbs. For a lot of people, this kind of bread leads to a much smoother blood sugar response. The texture is denser, and the taste is nuttier. It doesn't feel like sandwich bread you grew up with, but your glucose meter may thank you. Keto and protein breads are another option, especially if you're aiming for very low carbs. They're often made from nut flours, seeds, and fibers instead of wheat. Blood sugar spikes are usually minimal, but there's a trade-off. They're often higher in fat and calories, and for some people, very high-fat meals can increase insulin resistance over time. So they're useful tools, not something you need to base your entire diet on. Now let's talk about rice, because this one feels personal for a lot of people. Rice is comfort. Rice is culture. Rice is what's on the plate when families come together. The problem with white rice is that it's almost pure starch. Very little fiber, very little protein. That means it digests quickly and turns into glucose fast. Brown rice is better because it still has its outer layer, which adds fiber and slows digestion. The spike is usually smaller and slower. Wild rice goes a step further. It's technically not rice at all, but it behaves more like a whole grain. It has more protein and fiber, and for many people, that means a gentler glucose rise. Here's something most people don't realize. Cooling rice after cooking it and then reheating it later also creates resistant starch, just like freezing bread. That means yesterday's rice can be better for your blood sugar than fresh, steaming rice straight from the pot. It doesn't make it carb-free, but it changes how your body handles it. Black rice and red rice are interesting too. They contain antioxidants and a bit more fiber, and they tend to cause a slower glucose rise than plain white rice. Not perfect, but better. And then there are substitutes that aren't really rice at all, like cauliflower rice or shirataki rice. Cauliflower rice is just vegetables shaped like rice. Very low in carbs, high in fiber, and for many people, it barely moves blood sugar at all. Shirataki rice is made mostly of soluble fiber and water. It has almost no digestible carbs. Blood sugar stays flat for most people. The texture is different. The taste is neutral. It's not going to replace a bowl of jasmine rice emotionally, but metabolically, it's one of the safest options out there. But here's where things get practical. You don't have to replace rice entirely. You can change the context. If your plate is only rice, that's a glucose bomb. If your plate is rice plus vegetables plus protein, the story changes. Fiber and protein slow digestion. Fat slows it too, though sometimes too much fat can keep blood sugar elevated longer. When you build your plate with balance, rice stops being the villain and becomes just one piece of the puzzle. Now pasta. This is where heartbreak lives for a lot of people. Pasta is easy, filling, and comforting. Traditional pasta is made from refined wheat flour. That means fast carbs and quick glucose spikes. But whole grain pasta behaves differently. More fiber, slower digestion, smaller spike. Not perfect, but noticeably better. Then you get into legume-based pastas made from chickpeas, lentils, or black bean. These have much more protein and fiber and fewer digestible carbs. Many people see their blood sugar stay under control with these compared to wheat pasta. The taste is different. The texture is firmer. You might not fall in love with it on day one, but from a glucose standpoint, it's a big upgrade. Then there's shirataki noodles again. Almost no digestible carbs, almost no glucose rise. They don't behave like traditional pasta, and they work best with strong sauces because the noodles themselves are very mild. Think of them as a carrier for flavor, not the star of the show. How you cook pasta also matters. Al dente pasta digests more slowly than overcooked mushy pasta. Cooling pasta after cooking can also increase resistant starch, just like rice. Portion size is huge too. Traditional Italian portions are much smaller than what most restaurants serve. 2 ounces of dry pasta is very different from a giant bowl. Your blood sugar knows the difference, even if your eyes don't. Sauce choice matters more than people expect. Tomato-based sauces with olive oil and herbs usually lead to a quicker rise and fall. Cream-based sauces with lots of butter and cheese often cause blood sugar to rise more slowly but stay elevated longer. That can be tricky, especially if you use insulin. And added sugar in sauces is the worst of both worlds. Fast spike plus longer elevation. Movement after meals is one of the most underrated tools out there. A simple walk after eating can help muscles pull glucose out of the blood. It doesn't need to be intense. It just needs to happen. It's like giving your body a second way to handle the carbs besides insulin alone. And if you do use insulin, timing and dose really matter. Meals higher in fiber and protein often need less insulin and allow more flexibility. High-carb, high-fat meals usually require more planning because digestion is slower and more unpredictable. So here's the big takeaway. Bread, rice and pasta aren't automatically bad. What's bad is refined versions eaten alone in large portions. What works better is fiber-rich versions, smaller portions, and pairing them with protein and vegetables. It's also about preparation. Freezing bread, cooling rice, cooking pasta al dente. These are boring tricks. They're not flashy, but they're backed by physiology, not hype. And this matters because food is emotional. People don't just eat for nutrients. They eat for connection and comfort. If managing diabetes feels like punishment, it's not going to last. The goal is to build a way of eating that keeps your blood sugar stable and still lets you feel like a normal human being. And yes, everyone's body is different. What works for one person might not work exactly the same for another. That's why checking your own blood sugar response matters more than any rule on the internet. This is not medical advice, and you should always talk with your doctor or dietitian about changes to your diet, especially if you use insulin or other glucose-lowering medications. If this changed how you think about bread, rice, or pasta, hit subscribe because I break down health and nutrition like this every week. No fear-mongering, no miracle claims. Just real food, real science, and real-life strategies you can actually use.